Jared Huffman has represented the North Bay, North Coast area in the United States House of Representatives since 2014. A Democrat prior to his tenure in Congress, Jared was in the California State Assembly and was a director of the Marin Municipal Water District. He's a Democrat. He lives with his family here in San Rafael, and he's our guest on IJ Forum today. Jared, welcome.
Good to be with you, Dick.
It's a pleasure to have you, Jared, on IJ Forums, but I'm troubled this week because of that tragedy that happened in Washington with the congressional baseball game. I know you're intimately familiar with it. It's just a symptom, though, to me, of the divisions that are tearing apart this country.
Part of it is. I think you're right. The more we learn about this shooter, the more we see how some of the vitriol in our politics fueled, obviously, a violent, deranged act, but it was part of it.
Crazy people are out there. I know we're not supposed to say crazy, the politically correct term, but crazy people are out there, and they're going to get signs that it's okay. They're going to get motivations. We've got a division now that approaches the years before the Civil War. How do you see us resolving this, or is it resolvable?
Yeah. Well, I think all of us have a role to play in that, and certainly I think many members of Congress have, in the wake of this event, tried to do some reflection, tried to think about how we can set a better tone and a better example. It's tough right now because this political climate is just loaded and difficult, and frankly, it comes from the top. Our president is not a uniter. He fans the flames. He plays base politics in the most ruthless ways. So we're going to have to find a way to do it in spite of him, I think, but we have to do it.
Well, but Jared, there's even deeper problems. We have a media in this country, sometimes for profit, sometimes for political gain, that fans the flames.
Yep.
We have people on social media who have no responsibility and no reaction to what anybody says, and who either do it for joy or for profit.
Right.
So Trump goes away. We still have
There's
a media
still
that's fixated on this for profit.
Absolutely.
How do we bring back America, or can we bring back America to where we can at least talk to each other and agree on the facts?
Well, you and I and anyone watching this conversation is probably not going to make the InfoWars and the Drudge Report and other incendiary media organs go away. There is a constituency for that stuff. But I think we have to call it out when we see it. I don't think we can normalize this. So whether it's coming from Donald Trump or from some deranged Bernie Sanders supporter or from one of these crazy outlets like InfoWars, we can't just roll our eyes and just sort of accept this as part of the new baseline in politics in America. I think we've got to keep calling it out. And it gets tiresome. Believe me, I'm really tired of calling out Donald Trump, and we're just 7 months into this presidency almost.
I don't watch
6 months.
Cable television too often, but my wife does, and I hear screams coming out of the room with too much frequency.
Yeah.
We're almost overwhelmed by the message right now. Just politics has done it. And I saw in a Politico an article which said the division by politics, by party in America today is more intense than by race.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I saw that same piece.
In Congress, where are we with the president? Not just with the Democrats, I presume nowhere.
Yeah.
Where are the Republicans with the president?
With Donald Trump?
Yeah.
It varies. You've got some that absolutely drank the Kool-Aid. And whether that's catching the political wave or whether they really did come to see him as a great political leader. But he's still got a pretty strong following on the Hill. But there are cracks. And I've got a growing number of colleagues who are embarrassed by his behavior. And so, they do a little compartmentalizing. They'll talk about, gosh, yeah, he behaves terribly, but, he really is trying to do good things and we need to give him a chance. And so there's that sort of thing. But there's a growing number of my colleagues on the Republican side that are starting to call him out. And I think that's going to increase as these scandals and controversies just continue to bog down the whole country.
In 1998, it took Barry Goldwater, I think Hugh Scott, and Howard Baker to break the bad news. They had a lot of courage. They were the Republicans. Democrats can trash Republicans all they want. There's been terrific Republicans, even in recent times. Are there people of that stature left, or of that courage left, to be able to say to Mr. Trump things he doesn't want to hear?
Well, the hard part with Donald Trump, I think, is it's hard to identify someone that he would actually listen to. that wasn't an immediate family member, and kind of on the dole, on the family business dole, they're not going to stand up to him, obviously. So in terms of the political establishment, anybody that tried to give him that frank, tough love would get counterattacked immediately.
The healthcare debate has reached almost a lull in some ways due to the secrecy that's happening about planning the repeal and replacement plan.
Right.
Is the president involved in that at all, or is this purely the Senate majority and the House majority putting together a plan?
The president is not substantively involved or invested in any of this. I think he had only a superficial understanding of what was in the House bill. He's just done political backflips. First, claiming that it was going to be great, cover everyone, lower prices, made all of these crazy promises. Then having a celebration about the passage out of one house of a bill that didn't do any of those things he promised. In fact, we know the CBO and others have told us it goes in the other direction. It's really bad for his own people. And then he turns around and has it the other way by telling senators that House bill is a mean bill, and he's counting on them to do something better. So it's dizzying. You just get whiplash watching Donald Trump flip around on these things. And I think the takeaway is he's just not that engaged. He wants a bill. He wants something on his desk that he can sign so he can claim that he defeated Obamacare.
The hope at the beginning of the year was that the one topic that could perhaps provide some or have obtained bipartisan support was on infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I just saw the briefing, a brief briefing, if you will, on the infrastructure plan after we finished Infrastructure Week. And the $1 trillion infrastructure plan turned out to be a decrease in spending for the Corps of Engineers and Department of Transportation, but a $200 million tax break that somehow will, over 10 years...
Theoretically would leverage a bunch of private investment, yeah.
But the message I got on that, not forget about the president's plan, the message I get is that there's broad support in this country for for what Trump promised.
Yeah.
A $1 billion real U.S. money.
Trillion.
Trillion. Quote Everett Dirksen, a billion here, a billion there. After a while, you're talking real money.
That's right.
$1 trillion plan to do something on infrastructure. I mean, we need it. Nothing's happening. Why doesn't a Democrat run on that?
Well, we are. In fact, I'm part of the Progressive Caucus, and we've put out a $2 trillion infrastructure plan to really cover the bases on all of our needs, not just roads and bridges that we talk about a lot, but public transit systems, municipal water systems, wastewater systems, broadband coverage out into rural communities all over this country. This would jumpstart the economy, it would put people to work, it would make our country productive and competitive and answer a lot of our needs. Haven't heard anything like that from the Republican side, and certainly not from the president. We've heard the gimmicky stuff. He counted, by the way, in Infrastructure Week, he counted his plan to privatize air traffic control as part of his infrastructure package.
Which I appreciate is not part of infrastructure. I will say that in the air traffic control, and for the folks out there, the president had proposed, correct me if I'm wrong, that the present federal employees who run America's air traffic control system be replaced by a nonprofit, which would do it. It's my understanding, though, that Canada has a similar situation. Worked out pretty well.
They do. Canada, however, is a fraction of the air traffic that we have, a fraction of the general aviation. We have the most congested, complicated air traffic system in the world, and the kicker is we've got the safest by far in the world. So that combination of things makes me very skeptical about a blow it all up and privatize it kind of solution.
As you know, I was just in New York, and many of the New York parks now are part, not necessarily a public, well, it is public-private partnership, but the private is not for profit, is nonprofit. Central Park Conservancy, the High Line, beautifully maintained, well-worked, and help temper New York's, they have it's a high tax, high expenditure place, that they work well. Are you ruling out these type of not-for-profit, legitimately not-for-profit, not the phony baloney
Yeah.
stuff. Are you ruling that out as a possibility?
not at all.
Not just on air traffic control,
Like
but
for
as-
national parks and public lands, there are a lot of opportunities. In fact, I, for the last few years, have authored a bipartisan bill called the Park Partners Bill to do a little bit more of just what you described. There would need to be some guardrails to make sure that we're not, turning our parks into Disneyland. But we can have much more partnership and collaboration with the private sector and philanthropy to leverage those dollars.
The Central Park experience is really something to see, though. It's very well maintained. It's very well policed. It's just a great experience, and there's no conflict. People are not opposed to it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of that's a good way to go.
I'm glad they have that. I'll take Point Reyes National Seashore and Redwood National Park on my end of the country.
Of course, then you get to avoid the oyster wars if you don't have a
Central Park Oyster Wars.
Healthcare. Back to healthcare for a second. The whole topic after the last presidential election on the Democratic side has now reawakened an interest in what I tend to call Medicare for all. Certainly, Senator Sanders' folks are absolutely committed to it.
Yep.
Many progressives are committed to it, but it's not universal on the Democratic side of the aisle. Reaction, and I have to tell you, I'm a Medicare for all person. Actually, for me, because I'm on Medicare.
You like your Medicare?
I love
probably.
it.
Yeah.
Don't fool around with my Medicare. That's the bottom line.
Okay. I promise you, I won't. I just want to make it available to more people.
Well, that's my question.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Here's what I think. First of all, you would find me firmly on the progressive side of the political spectrum. I have voted for single-payer health care as a state legislator. I've co-sponsored legislation to do Medicare for all at the federal level. And so when I hear people talk about a schism within the Democratic Party, I've talked to my colleagues, across the board on this, and I think almost universally people accept that Medicare for all is the long-term goal. I don't know too many Democrats that would debate that. We all think we need to get there. The question is, do you go all the way right now, or do you try to do it incrementally? And, I look at the healthcare delivery system right now, and I see we have a lot of single payer already. We have Medicaid, we have Medicare, we have the VA. Those are all government insurance programs. So you've already, you can demystify this single payer thing a little bit when you talk about it in those terms. You've got millions and millions of Americans right now getting government health insurance, and it works okay. And so I think we should keep incrementally expanding that. And
What's the next increment?
well, early buy-in to Medicare would be a next increment, public options. My colleague Peter DeFazio has an idea to create a government nonprofit that would step in and serve rural communities, places where you see the Aetnas and Anthems dropping out in some counties and some states. We could have a government nonprofit insurance entity step in and serve those places.
What about extending Medicare to people under 18?
People under 18.
Children.
Well, we have a children's health insurance program. It's need-based. I think the next logical increment is probably going down to 55 or 50.
Mm-hmm. Howard,
yeah.
What's his name? Ran for president, governor of Vermont.
Yeah, Howard.
Howard. What's this?
I know. The
Cool.
doctor.
The doctor from Vermont.
With a scream. I have a scream.
Yes, indeed.
Howard Dean.
That's how he proposed, go down to 55.
Yeah.
John, we're going to take a break for just a second and come right back, and I want to talk to you about some international and some local stuff, too.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, Jared. Let me go to an international thing for a second. I was just in Britain and following the papers over there. So my question to you is...
Were you there during any of the incidents?
I was there when Theresa May... No, not the... yes, I was there during the first one,
Okay.
but not in London. I was also there when Theresa May brought out her manifesto and backed off in 4 days, which was not a well-run campaign, and which is what happens. So the question is, who's the leader of the free world?
Oh, good question.
My suggestion at present, it's a title that doesn't necessarily belong exclusively to the American president. Angela Merkel, temporarily. Emmanuel Macron, in the long term or in the midterm? Thoughts?
So I think functionally, the leader of the free world whether we like it or not, is Donald Trump. He's not a very good leader of the free world. And in fact, the free world is reeling under his leadership. He's just doing a terrible job bringing countries and allies together, and he's driving a lot of wedges into relationships that are very important. And really calling into question, what does the U.S. stand for these days? That's all very disturbing. But in terms of the energy and the aspirations of the world and the admiration of the world, yeah, you look to people like Angela Merkel, you look to Macron, he's new and unproven, of course, so we have to see where he goes with this. But Trudeau in Canada, you've got a lot of dynamic leaders on the scene coming together, really doing some pretty historic and exciting things. I mean, the fact that they're all ready to pick up the momentum and keep going with the Paris Climate Accord, even if Donald Trump takes his ball and goes home, tells you a lot.
My question, or my worry, is that in a real crisis situation, they're going to have to look to somebody they trust.
Yeah.
And it's probably not.
Nobody trusts Donald Trump.
That's right. So then, who is the person? Is it Merkel, or is there nobody out there? Are we leaderless?
It's a real difficult question right now. When you see something as stabilizing and important as NATO suddenly in question and in limbo because of Donald Trump. We're going to be repairing a lot of the damage that he has done to our alliances and to the stability of this world for years to come.
Let's talk politics for a second. Democratic Party, you just get the sense they're saying, oh boy, Trump will defeat himself. Maybe not so.
Yeah.
There seems to be almost a vacuum in leadership. And I'm not talking just about at the presidential level, but I am talking about the presidential level candidates. But in a party level, the leadership, Nancy Pelosi, fine person that she may be, is getting on in years, as we all are. But supervised a Democratic Party who I think is down to 18 state legislatures. What's out there for the Democrats? What leadership is of the Democrats that might take this party back to becoming the majority party?
Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of talent and a lot of leadership in the Democratic ranks. It's not always the person you see on television the most. There are a lot of worker bees, workhorses within the caucus that have a huge amount of talent, a huge amount of credibility and support within the caucus. And I think you'll see that start to emerge. You're already seeing it emerge. People like Joe Crowley and Tim Ryan and, folks that we think of as the next generation of leaders in the caucus. But
even I have to say,
yeah.
Joe Crowley, oh yeah. I knew a Joe Crowley in the old days in San Francisco. Who's Joe
Different
Crowley?
Joe. Well, yeah, people need to get to know Joe
But
Crowley.
who is he?
So he's the chair of the Democratic caucus.
Okay.
And, he's one of the real up-and-comers. He has a huge following, great relationships in the caucus. He's somebody that is mentioned when you think about, who will the next generation of leaders be. There's a handful of others, too.
I confess I've never heard of him.
Yeah, get to know Joe Crowley.
All right.
Son of a cop from Long Island, very charismatic guy.
What's he represent?
Long Island.
Oh, is that Long
yeah,
Island?
Yeah.
Okay. But the Democrats obviously have an opportunity to learn something from 2018. Who was the one that says when there's a catastrophe, at least you can learn something?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, there was a catastrophe for the Democrats. What did they learn?
So we've got to keep thinking about what did we learn in 2016, you mean?
2016, yes.
Yeah. So
The Clinton Trump election. It was in the papers.
people need to when you look at what did the Democrats do, what did the Democrats need to fix, this was a top-of-the-ticket election. And one of the things that we struggle with sometimes among House Democrats is, second-guessing ourselves, kicking ourselves, what could we have done differently? We were going to rise or fall with Hillary Clinton, almost no matter what we did or said, because nobody was thinking about what is the House Democrats' message in the home stretch of the 2016 campaign.
Yeah.
It was all what's going on between Hillary and Trump, and all of these issues that swirled because of Comey and the Russians. And so a lot happened, a lot went wrong. Certainly, the person we had at the top of the ticket was not perfect, not a perfect messenger. I actually thought her message was pretty darn good, but it got lost in a lot of other things. And House Democrats were naturally along for the ride in that election. 2018 is different. 2018 is not a top-of-the-ticket election. It's one where we will shape a lot of our own message.
I just finished Shattered, the book on the Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign. It's not a partisan book. It's for political junkies because it's a serious attempt at analysis. And one of the things the Democratic Party, to me, is wrapped around now is identity politics. And the idea that over the years we would assemble, or they would assemble a coalition of ethnic groups and racial groups, never presumed that somebody like Donald Trump would assemble a white identity politics. Is there any possibility that identity politics can be done with?
Well, yes and no. I guess if you tell me we've arrived at the point where we have voting rights locked away and guaranteed, where you don't have voter suppression and other really insidious forms of racism still playing out in a big, big way in our electoral system, then that part of identity politics we can certainly do away with. But until then, I'm going to stand up with Democrats, and I wish we had some Republicans, to fight for the African American community's right to vote. It's amazing we're still fighting that fight.
It's always, when there's a speech, there's always the laundry list to make sure everybody's had a tip of the hat. And then we want to thank the American Indians for being here. We want to thank the people from the Comoro Islands who are certainly with us. At some point in time,
I think
you lose.
Well, I'm not really going to blame that for the Democrats underachieving in 2016. I think embracing diversity and tolerance and the richness of this diverse fabric of our country, I think that's a strong suit of the Democratic Party.
And when we took our break, our brilliance came together and we realized Howard Dean was the person we were talking about. And Howard Dean was the one that suggested a 50-state campaign.
We need that.
Right now, it's not that way.
No, it's not. And that's because the DNC has focused only on raising money for the presidential nominee when that time came. And what Howard Dean talked about, and frankly, what Tom Perez is talking about right now with Keith Ellison as his number 2, is first of all, not just waiting around for the presidential cycle, getting out now, building the bench, but also building it in all 50 states. I want to circle back quickly to this notion of identity politics. Yes. The idea that you've got to choose between having an agenda for jobs and economic issues and the social issues and the identity politics that some describe. I think we have to do both. We can't just do diversity. We have to also do the economic piece, and that's why we lost the 2016 election. Because those who care about the diversity issues and tolerance and equality are always going to be with Democrats for the most part. But we've always had a whole bunch of voters, especially in the Rust Belt and some of these states that were in play in 2016, that may not have been with Democrats on guns or on whatever. They held their nose and voted with Democrats because we had their back on jobs and on the economy and working class interests. We lost that faith in this last election, and we got to start showing up and rebuilding our credibility with that constituency.
There's been obviously a lot of analysis on the presidential election. Democrats really believe that their message and the planks are important. But there's so much evidence today that the motivation is hatred for other people. You can go to places and, the reason they just don't like those guys on the tree huggers.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference recently and they told me that in southern states, coastal states, you don't talk about climate change.
In coastal states?
Coastal states, you use another term. Because that's identified with people they don't like.
Okay. So extreme weather.
Various things.
Yeah.
But it's personal.
Yeah.
It's visceral. It's not so much.
Well, there's some of that. I would say climate change is an issue where the reality of it, the politics of it are trending in a good way. I mean, you saw the backlash against Donald Trump's decision to pull out of Paris. Even among Republicans who were polled, they disagreed with what he did. And you had a number of, I've got a couple of Republican colleagues in the House, believe it or not, that came right out and publicly criticized that. You almost never see that kind of fracture. So I think climate politics are trending to a better place, and Donald Trump is just completely out of step.
6 counties in your district. Oregon line to the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Very diverse. Talk about diverse.
Very.
How do they differ? How are they perceiving what's happened in the last 6 months differently?
Well, I've had town halls in every corner of this district. Almost the same mood and the same response. And maybe that's because the people who choose to come out to these town halls are, a little self-selecting.
Yeah.
But it's been one of positive, principled resistance, and a lot of people have shaken off their denial and their dismay at Trump's victory and just want to see us fight back against Trump and take back our country. So I've had huge crowds.
People, I know you've gotten pressures from some of the left to start getting involved in an impeachment effort.
Mm-hmm.
I think your position has been it's premature.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
All right, let's. And the question would be is, when's it ripe?
When I can get 218 votes, it's ripe. Okay, so
after 2018.
Well, maybe. So here's the thing. I believe impeachment is obviously an extraordinary remedy. It's not to be invoked just because you don't like the guy in office or he's a different party or a different political agenda. And the minute the American people think impeachment is being politicized that way, we got a real problem. So I think it's very important that if and when impeachment is used, it not be seen as just a partisan power play. It was against Bill Clinton. It was absolutely misused in 1998 against Bill Clinton because there were not serious grounds for impeachment.
It was probably misused against Andrew Johnson.
Well,
it's probably been misused each time.
Perhaps, well, not against Nixon, I don't think.
Well, they never got the, well, that did get to the...
Articles of impeachment
were they
came
filed?
forward, overwhelmingly supported, bipartisan.
Oh, that's true then.
So the American people, I think, in that case, knew that there was overwhelming bipartisan support.
Yeah.
This was not a partisan play. All right, so we need Republican votes for that reason against Donald Trump. We also need them for the math because we've only got 193 Democrats and we've got to get to 218. So that's my answer. Impeachment will be ripe when we can build the bipartisan support to get to 218 and to show the American people that this is not partisan.
Back to district. Last question, or last point. The change with a Republican Congress and a Republican president, what are the implications for this district? Healthcare aside, I know changing healthcare would be dramatic, huge cost.
Yeah.
Let's put that aside.
Okay.
Other than that.
Well, infrastructure is a great example. And you mentioned that Donald Trump, while having a lot of fanfare around Infrastructure Week and trotting out the Marin band and having, a ceremony at the White House, is actually cutting the transportation budget, is cutting the Corps of Engineers. We're going backward at a time when we need to be going forward on public infrastructure and public investments. That'll hurt the North Bay and the North Coast because we got a lot of needs, whether it's finishing this SMART train, getting it to Larkspur, getting it on up to Cloverdale, which I'm committed to doing eventually. We could have a whole show on that subject probably. Or if you go further north in my district, you've seen some of the landslides on Highway 101. I've got a section of Highway 101 falling into the ocean as you approach Crescent City. It's called Last Chance Grade.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to cost $500, $600, $700 million to reroute that part of the highway. I can't do that with tax cuts for the rich and calling that infrastructure. I need public investment, and I need the federal government to be part of it.
Jared, it's a pleasure to have you on IJ Forums. I'd love to have you back sometime after this session, maybe toward the first of the year. And wish you all the luck in Washington and the excitement that unfortunately follows.
Thanks for having me.
Good. Take care.
Yeah.